So much for humour.
Back to you, Jack.
Yes, well, that was very interesting. Yes, this transmitter and receiver that I have is a Pi MTR1. It's hybrid. Everything's transistorized except the RF part of the transmitter. There's 4 valves in the transmitter. The modulator and receiver is transistorized, and it does run off a battery. I've got a battery here that won't start a car, but it's good enough for this, and I'm charging it from a battery charger I made all by myself out of an old radio tranny and a 75-cent rectifier, and I have it on charge here, and it seems to work. Gets a bit warm, but otherwise it's all right. And anyway, this MTR1 was put out for the Army. Pi made it in Australia for the Army. The one I have is built in 1966, and it also is one of these things that was meant to be used by idiots. It's got a sort of a minimum of controls on it, and it's being used by an idiot now, actually. But anyway, I've managed to get it working quite well. It doesn't do a bad job, really, but the way it's laid out, it wouldn't work too well on 15 metres or anything like that. I think the highest band you could probably work on is about 20 metres, but I don't use it on those bands. It's all right for this band. It's quite good. I didn't pay too much for it. I like that about it. Now, I forgot to mention during the last day that somebody asked me about that law book that I was reading my test transmission from. Well, no, I'm not a lawyer or a law student, but I just happen to have this book here. I have a few law books around because I'm always getting ripped off by people, or people are attempting to, and I like to know something about the law. So I just have a few books. I like to know something about everything, really, and I have a few law books around because I've discovered that when you go to lawyers, it's no good expecting them to know anything about the law. Whenever I go to a lawyer, they always hand me over to the apprentice, and I usually have to take a copy of a law book or whatever act's involved in and point out things to them. You can never rely on them to find out for themselves. You have to sort of hold them by the hand sometimes and lead them through the book, or it saves a lot of time and money anyway if you know a little bit about it yourself and you can discuss things with them. I don't claim to be knowledgeable about the law as lawyers are, but you're in a rather weak and silly position if you go to a lawyer and you don't know anything about the law that you're dealing with, so I always try to find out. Now, somebody said something about how old am I? Well, I remember back in the 60s they used to say things like, never trust anybody over 30, and I am over 30, and 110 in the mornings, and 15 in the afternoons, and 64 at night. No, I'm probably older than you are, and quite a bit older than you are, out externally anyway, but internally I'm about 24, I think. And I won't mention a figure, it'll spoil the illusion. It's happened before. You won't accept me on the same basis if I actually tell you how old I am. Just say that I'm a fair bit over 30, but I'm also a fair bit under 50. I'm sort of in the middle, you know. And I would guess that all you people there are under 25 because you were having a conversation the other night, which you'll probably remember, about cornflakes and things like that. I actually managed to crack your code, and that makes you probably under 25, although you do get some... You could be older, but I think taking that fact into account and the general sort of merriment and the sound of your voices, it would all be under 25. There could be somebody there who's maybe 28, but certainly no older than that. And I noticed that you all seem to do a fair bit of listening to the broadcast stations. You're all able to say who's playing what on the Melbourne broadcast station and who's a good announcer and who's not and things like that. That's interesting because I didn't think many people listen to broadcast stations. I thought they were all sort of very commercialised and one was much the same as another, but apparently there's a section of the population that does listen to them. I suppose they're all right. I listen to them myself sometimes, but the commercials put me off. I hate commercials. I always make it a point of honour never to buy anything that's advertised on TV if I can possibly avoid it. The only time I ever broke that rule was when I left my razor home once when I went on a trip, and I had to buy one of those plastic ones that ballpoint pen company puts out. Because there was nothing else available. I was in Hobart at 8 o'clock in the morning. That's all I could get. And that has happened there very good. I don't use anything else now, but as a rule, I hate commercials and I don't buy anything that I see advertised on TV. I note, noting what you were saying about Graham Kennedy, had an interesting discussion there on Graham Kennedy. I suppose, I don't think there was much TV talent at all in Melbourne, because I was watching that Logie presentation night the other night, and it all seemed a bit sort of tacky to me. They always get some clapped out Hollywood actor. They had Burt Lancaster there. He doesn't come to Australia till he's about 68, you know. He wouldn't come near the place until then, but he comes out and he presents the Logies, and it was all seemed to me to be a pale imitation of what's going on in Hollywood. We're all persons in politics who are trying to be Henry Kissinger, and people have always got a sort of a bigger and shinier prototype who's 8,000 miles across the horizon, who they try to imitate. And that's how it seemed to me about a lot of the TV personalities that I saw there that night. But anyway, getting back to Graham Kennedy, I think that Graham's got some redeeming features. Because he did send up commercials. He had to advertise things in the early days, and he made a joke of it, and he made fun of it and said, you know, you wouldn't really drink this and things like that, but it became his gimmick. Advertisers used to get him to advertise their things in order to have them sent up, but at the time when he first began to send them up, he really meant it. He had a sense that what he was doing was phony, and he also had a sense of humour, and he tried to get a bit of fun out of it, and it certainly became his gimmick. And another thing about him too, I've seen him. I saw him in Power Without Glory, for example. He had a bit part in Power Without Glory. I don't think from seeing him take that bit part in, he played as a sports columnist. That's right, who got beaten up by the John West organisation. But I don't think he didn't seem to mind anyway when he was playing that small part in Power Without Glory about being upstaged by better actors. There were better actors all around him, and he did seem to take his part for what it was. So I don't think he's as much of an ego tripper as people are inclined to think, and he's not really a bad actor either. He didn't do a bad job acting that piece in Power Without Glory. I think Power Without Glory is one of the very few things I've seen on Australian TV that I thought was very good. I wouldn't have missed it for anything. I did miss the middle of it. I was away from Melbourne for a few months in the middle of it. It had its weak points, but it wasn't a bad production. I wish we could get a few more like that. On the other hand, you've got things like the Sullivans on the commercial channels, which were sort of billed as a rival to Power Without Glory, but they're just sort of television's equivalent of Dad and Dave and Martin's Corner and soapbox serials that used to be on in the early days. What they essentially amount to is the reinforcement of people's prejudices. A lot of TV and radio serials and things like that, like 96 in the Box and stuff like that, they just are sort of designed to reassure people that whatever dreary kind of life they're living, well, it's all right. They're just reflecting people back to themselves and reinforcing their prejudices and reassuring them that their life is meaningful. Actually, it isn't in a lot of cases. I find those sort of just like us serials and things they put on TV, a bit of a pain in the you-know-what and a bit of a bore. And Power Without Glory, I thought, was the one outstanding Australian thing in living memory. Okay, now, I note what you say about the movies. I'm not sure who the movie maker is. I'm not sure who's who there. But I'm very glad to know that you are trying to make real movies and not just pointing the camera at Auntie Mabel's cat or something like that. I know one or two people who are in the movie-making business here, but it's very interesting to see that you're there trying to make serious movies. I think that's a very good thing. There are a few people around who used to do those things in the old days who have since made a few real movies. I haven't seen many of them. I don't think they're all terrific, but we've had more movies made in Australia in about the last 5 years than we had made in the previous 50, and I'm all for this sort of upsurge of a whole lot of serious and professional filmmakers. So I wish you sort of very good, well, I won't say very good luck, that's a horrible term. I wish you great success with your movie making, and I hope that you end up making real movies that are commercially successful. I'd be interested to know what some of the movies are about, if it's sort of possible to broadcast that kind of thing. My imagination's running from one extreme to the other. I don't know what might be in them, but are they sort of arty movies, or could you give me some description of what the scenario is, what's actually in the movie? Yes, you did tell me. I've got it noted down here. It's got something to do with a recent political event. It must surely be the day that Goth got the gong or something like that, because I was out on that day anyway. I might even appear in your movie, I don't know, but it's just possible. And okay about 8mm being cheaper than 16, well, I suppose it is, yes. Photography's getting very expensive. I take quite a lot of black and white still photographs and a few slides. Just sort of candid camera stuff. I don't hold myself to be a great photographer, although I have taken a few good pictures. But I know that costs are going up, and I used to take a 35mm 36-shot film to a certain well-known photographic establishment in Collins Street, and they used to process and print it for $5 or $6, and the last time I went in there it was well over $8, and it's getting to the point where I'm going to have to do my own again. I've got a tank and things down here, and I'll have to do my own. It's just getting to be too much. Like everything else, I really can't afford to have the professionals do it for me, so I'll have to do it myself. Actually, I took some photos in London a few years ago. There was one of where they were ripping down Covent Garden, and it was sort of like a bomb site, because everyone had been turfed out of the shops, and there were whole blocks and streets that were full of sort of empty buildings with the windows and doors bashed in. It looked like a bomb site. Anyway, there was this enormous hole in the ground. It was about 3 stories deep, and it was full of mud and water and bulldozers. It was the hole that was left after they'd pulled down an enormous building. And anyway, I took a photo of that. There was a fence in front, and on the fence it had painted a piece of graffiti. It had, "One does not sell the land upon which people walk. Crazy horse." Apparently that's a quotation from the Indian chief. Crazy horse. Anyway, this turned out sort of accidentally to be quite a neat sort of a photograph, so I had it blown up into a big poster, and I've got it on the wall, but of course it's a little bit out of date, because that's sort of back to the land conservation stuff fading out. I did try to flog it to commercial poster makers, but nothing came of it. And anyway, that's one little work photography I've got hanging on the wall, and it was worth doing. I will keep it because I like it very much. Okay, well, I'm just talking to a piece of plastic here. It's not really as live and the same as when you're having a conversation where you exchange sentences with people. So I'll stop talking now, and I'll put it back to you, and I don't know whether you're still editing your film or not, but set the test up, and then we'd all hang around sort of expectantly till some unsuspecting person plugged it in, and it went bang, and then we'd all laugh. Well, that's what we used to do, amuse ourselves anyway. But anyway, I'm glad there was no bangs in your transmitter on that over. It seems to be hanging together. Yes, well, there's a lot of things coming about ABC TV being better. Yes, it is. I agree that it's better than most of the commercial stuff, but we get a lot of shows on it from England, which is sort of slanted to reinforcement to the English person that his way of life is meaningful. We get things like Alf Garnett, which is reassuring to a very large section of the English population that the English working class may be ignorant, but despite the fact that they're ignorant and they don't speak English very well, they're still sort of great guys in there, and their way of life means something. And then we get the similar thing in that George and Mildred program, and we got the same thing in Man About the House. Man About the House was telling all the sort of office workers who can't make ends meet, who get hardly any wages, that don't solve their problems, and live squeezed together, six sharing a little flat, to share a little flat with six other people and have no money and have a landlord on your back, well, it really is quite fun. That's what that's designed for. Then we get other things like those English police serials. They're a sort of an English Walter Mitty thing. That's to tell the English bank clerk, who doesn't have any adventures in his life, that it allows him to have a sort of a daydream that he's tough and he beats people up and solves crimes and makes flying tackles and runs around screeching tyres in his car. That's a sort of a Walter Mitty daydream for the Englishman in the humdrum job. But they just get shipped out here whole as bowlers. They really don't quite apply to us, but we understand.
What's going on? Where's the program gone? Hello, control room?
Mr. Control Room here.
What's happened to the program?
Yes, well now, I can remember, somebody was saying there ought to be a TV station. Well, I can remember I was on a ship once in, I think it was Houston, Texas or somewhere like that, and they had such a station there. In some American cities they do have such a station. It's usually on a UHF channel where the reception isn't as good as it is on the VHF channels, and it's usually run by a foundation, like you say, and in that case it was run by one of the local universities, and it was one of these things where anyone could come in and have a say, and you used to get all sorts of cranky people on it having their say, like the sort of factions of the lesbians movement, and you used to get sort of black power revolutionaries and people like that all coming in and having their say. Some of them seem to be a little bit crazy to me, but anyway, they let them all have a go. Actually, it's not a bad idea, I suppose, but probably wouldn't work in Melbourne, because if they can't get a full day's program on 3CR, which is just broadcasting and relatively simple, well, then they could never get it together to get even 4 or 5 hours of TV. It's hardly worth having a sort of a 3CR and looking at the announcer's head and shoulders. You can leave out the head and shoulders. It really won't make much difference. I agree with what you say about it's a bad thing that a lot of these sort of flying clubs and chess clubs and hiking clubs haven't got programs on 3CR. But I think there's a sort of a lot of political trendies have got hold of 3CR. I remember the very first night I listened to 3CR, some youth came on and said, today is American Independence Day. He said it in a real ochre accent, and what he said in effect was, it's American Independence Day, but we're not having anything to do with them Americans, and we're only going to have Australian programs on this station. And then he proceeded to drag out everything Australian he could find, and he'd had Peter Dawson singing some chauvinistic old song about the empire is best, and then they had, it was Fishermen of England or something. It was sung by an Australian. It didn't matter to this sort of trendy that the lyrics of the song were very sort of chauvinistic, and it was down at all other nations. We are the greatest. And then he had Leonard Teal reciting some Henry Lawson poem or something like that, forgetting that if you look at all of Henry Lawson's poems, well, Henry Lawson was a sort of an imitation a Kipling in some ways. He sort of modelled himself on Kipling. Some of his poems are all right. But when I remember during the First World War, Henry Lawson wrote some very sort of patriotic poems about down with the barbarian Huns and up with England. And he also was he also wrote some rather racist poems, sort of anti-Chinese poems about sort of built the yellow Asian hordes over the head and don't let them in here. So those people who sort of claim to be ultra patriotic and Australian nationalists forget some of those things in their sort of rush to grab anything Australian. Unfortunately, there isn't a very wide choice of what to grab. Anyway, we're not going to have anything American. We're for Australian independence, and we're only going to have Australian things. And I wrote and said, look, you wouldn't even be broadcasting and playing records if it hadn't been for the American Edison and DeForest. Surely you must be able to find something good in the American in American history and American life which you can broadcast. I don't expect you to find everything in the sort of wide panorama of American history to be to your taste, but there must be some things which you can highlight, which are. Anyway, I never got a reply to it. I don't know what happened. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that 3CR has fallen into the hands of some rather narrow-minded, trendy groups, in my opinion, because they have such programs about how wonderful life is in Albania. It runs for about 8 hours a week. Well, I don't think life in Albania is wonderful, and they say all there is to say about it in one hour program, but this one goes on and on and on. Now, when you have sort of groups like that dominating a thing, well, things like flying and chess and stuff like that, they get scared off, they won't come near it. So those people, I don't that it's necessarily right that they get scared off. It just happens to be a fact of life. People around here are fairly conservative, and they do get scared off by those things. They think somehow if they appear in the next program, they'll somehow be contaminated, so they hang off. And that's one of the reasons that 3CR doesn't get the wide range of programs that it could, in my opinion, anyway. Now, as for that FM station in Kew, well, I just live quite near it, and I get a bit of cross modulation from it. Although it's FM, I can't hear it. It's fairly snobbish. The music it plays is very, very heavy music. It's what I call squeaky door music, and you have to belong to a certain snobbish clique to even talk about it. And most people find it, which I probably think it is, and while I may admit that there may be groups of people who like that kind of thing, it is sort of in the hands of a group of snobs. I think, well, that's fair enough. I'm a Democrat. Snobs can have their station if they like, but it's got limited appeal. It's sort of the music's so ultra classical, and it's sort of the ultimate in one-upmanship. It's the kind of, it's got an exclusive air about it. Well, it can exclude me if it wishes, because I just don't like that kind of music. Now, you were saying to me right in the beginning, I think, that you think that I'm over 40 and I've got a fairly open mind. I think that's about right. That's not really far from the mark. Well, now, I was born in Melbourne. I lived in Melbourne until I was in my 30s, and I didn't really like living in Melbourne, but I didn't quite know why. But I used to find it got very dreary, and I didn't know at the time, but I discovered that the reason it was dreary, apart from the sort of background we live in, one of the reasons it was dreary was that I used to circulate with a limited number of people. I knew a limited number of people. They were sort of classed as bohemians in those days. I used to go to the pubs where the so-called bohemians went. But you kept on meeting the same group of people all the time. There might have been 150 people at the most, and you'd go to a party and you'd find 20 of them there and you'd talk to them, and then you'd go away, and then you'd go somewhere else the following weekend and you'd meet another 30. They needn't necessarily be the same ones, but the same sort of body of people kept on circulating and circulating and circulating, and they all had sort of different poses, but they all reinforced each other, and that's what I notice even when I go to an Australian party now, that you meet people who have known each other for a number of years, and they reinforce each other. One tells the other something, and then somebody else tells them the same thing. In other words, wherever you go, you hear the same opinions expressed from the same people, and then after a while there's sort of a gentleman's agreement made, and they accept your opinions, and there's a reinforcement goes on, and because you go around meeting all these people and they keep on reiterating the same thing and they keep on reinforcing some pet opinion that you've got, it then sort of ends up being accepted as the truth, and the sort of the truth like Genesis, that's how the world is. But what happened to me was when I got into my... I used to be a school teacher at a technical school, but one year I happened to save some money. I didn't know how it happened, but I had some money, so I got out of the country, and I went to England in the first place, and then I found life was. I thought before I went that it's no use leaving Australia because the rest of the world's exactly the same, and it'll only worse because at least you can make some money in Australia, and then the rest of the world you can't. Otherwise, life is the same. And I had sort of idea that life in England was all slums and things like that, which it is. But the thing that really changed me from being in England was the enormous variety of people that I met. Instead of going around in the same group with the same background who kept on saying things to you like, what school did you go to? That used to be the big put down. What school did you go to? I used to say I went to Swinburne Tech, which I did. But anyway, that all ceased. And when I got over there, I kept on meeting all sorts of foreign people. I used to meet people who had lived in entirely different backgrounds and had entirely different ideas. And you couldn't say to some sort of big West Indian, what school did you go to? It was just out of the question, you know. I used to meet people from all over the place, and there's a continuous stream of foreign people coming through. You'd be there one year, and there'd be you'd meet a whole lot of people from all over the place: Spanish people, Arabs, people from South America, people from here, people from there, all sorts of different attitudes and ideas. And then they'd all move on, and another lot would come through, and you kept on. The variety of people that you met and the variety of ideas you got flung at you was sort of very wide and without sort of limits, and it changed me a lot. When I came back here, I sort of saw that the place was a lot smaller than I thought it was, and I really don't think that I could really live here permanently now. One of the things I notice about living in Australia is people know everything out of a book or a newspaper. They're always saying, I read an article about this, that, the other thing, and they all know what's going on. We're always looking to this. We've always got a big Jesus who's 8,000 miles over the horizon. People are modelling themselves on things that are going on in Europe. They're modelling themselves on some trend in Europe, or they're modelling themselves on some trend in America. And you get people here who are always saying, I am the real interpreter and representative of Mozart or French culture or good food and wine or kung fu or meditation or whatever you like, whatever's going on overseas. There's always somebody who reads about it in a book or a magazine and then sort of imitates it, but there's not much really sort of indigenous sort of, I don't know what to call it, but there's not much sort of indigenous way of life going on. Our whole way of life is copied from somebody else because we're isolated sort of a European community, a long, long way from other European communities, and we're all trying to keep up with what they're allegedly doing, which we get through the press, which probably manipulates us a little bit for commercial reasons. Well, that encourages this desire to imitate what somebody in some other part of the world is doing. Well, it was the German army that came tramping through. It wasn't the Germans, it was the Swedes, and if it wasn't the Swedes, it was the Mongols or something like that. And people moulded people's attitudes because people knew that life could be short or whatever you had wasn't going to last. So life became important, and they learned to appreciate what really meant something in life and what didn't, and it's changed their whole attitude. So, for example, when we see a movie about what happened in the terrible war, like the Sullivans or something like that, well, then it's all full of sort of tinselly heroics, and it's all rather shallow and isn't it exciting, and weren't our boys wonderful, that kind of thing. But when you see a film that was made in a country like Poland about the war, well, it's much sort of deeper and mature. I don't know how to describe it, but you'll know what I mean. The people there really know what matters in life and what doesn't matter in life, and people here don't know reality from illusion. I think that's got something to do with it. I am raving on, aren't I? Now, what else do I want to say? Anyway, advice to young men. My advice to young men is, while you may be having a good time now, and you've got a lot of interesting friends around you, and enjoy it if you can, but don't repeat the same experience too much. Well, you'll find that living in Melbourne, up to a certain point you'll be having new experiences, but after a while you'll find yourself repeating the same experience again and again and again because of the limited number of things that it's possible to do living in a place like Melbourne. So therefore, after you've repeated it a couple of times, it's beginning to bore you a little bit. Well, it's like when you eat. They say when you eat, get up and leave the table while you're still hungry. Well, when you get to the point where you find yourself doing the same thing over and over again, that'll come when you're about 26 or 27. And if you can, get up off your seat and try to get overseas and travel a little bit because it's important to know what the rest of the world's like. For example, I used to find people in Australia I used to know people in Australia, and everything about the outside world comes to you as a photograph in a newspaper or something like that. So you see a photograph of a famine in Upper Patagonia or something like that, and you say, look at those stupid Upper Patagonians starving to death. It must only be because they're stupid and inefficient, and we marvellous efficient Australians, if we were there, well, wouldn't it be different? But people in Australia don't realise that here we have 13 million people who are living on a whole continent. It's a rich continent in agriculture and minerals. So it can be about 10% efficient, and it can still provide enough goods and food and money for us to have a fairly good standard of life. And we are really, we haven't got ourselves to thank for our prosperity. We've got the ingenuity of people like the Japanese to thank, because if it wasn't for the Japanese being so clever as to make cars and transistor radios and stuff like that, then they wouldn't need our raw materials, so we wouldn't be as prosperous as we are. So, but when you get overseas, you find that people in other countries are in entirely different situations. You get 50 million people who are living on a little piece of land, and they can't carry out enough agriculture to support themselves. And it's not particularly rich in minerals or something like that. So they've got to turn to other things to make ends meet. So they get very good at making something or other, which they export. And they may not live to our standard of living, but still they're pretty smart to live as well as they do. But you get a lot of people, you meet a lot of people who annoy you when you're travelling, who compare the standard of living. They say, oh, it's not the same as at home. Look, because they don't live, their houses aren't as good, and this isn't as good, and that isn't as good. They haven't got an up-to-date car, and they haven't got a swimming pool in their backyard. But the people that they're talking about frequently have a quality that we don't have any of, and I don't know what to call it, but I suppose you call it soul or joyful living or something like that. There are certain people in the world, the Latin people, for example, the Spanish people, some people in Asia, the Thais and people like that, who've got a quality called sort of soul, and they've got I don't know what you'd call it. It's not exactly. It's not really religious, but they've got a sort of an awareness of nature, of the world, or the world that they're in, and they've sort of struck a balance with it. They're not busy ripping everything apart and ripping up every rock and tearing down every tree because they can turn it into cornflakes or something and make money with it, or they can turn it into some plastic esky or something and sell it and advertise it on TV. They seem to have a better rapport with nature, or with the world, or with life. I don't know how to describe it, but anyway, they've got quality that we don't find here. So here I am, I'm an old man giving advice to young men, but about the getting married bit, well, now that's where you're going to fall into a trap. Don't do it too soon, because if you get married to some sort of middle-class Australian girl, well, you'll pay fairly dearly for it because they're very demanding. You have to have a better house than the Joneses next door, and you have to have a Volvo, and you have to have this, that, and that. They're pushing you and pushing you and pushing you to get all these status symbols which really aren't necessary. And then you're sort of nailed down by one foot. You'll never get away, and you don't know what you're missing in the outside world. There's all sorts of beautiful things in the outside world, and time will fly by, and you'll find yourself chained to some old boiler who's unrecognisable. That's what I see when I look at my friends that I knew when I was 20. I used to look at this one and that one and the other one, and I sort of thought they were doing better than I was, and they probably were materially. But when I see them today and they're sort of grey in the face from paying off their house, and they've got a demanding, possessive and nagging wife who's no longer beautiful and things like that, and they've got delinquent kids, I don't envy them a bit. I think the only people that I know that have sort of successfully married in Melbourne are fairly well-to-do people who have, whether both the husband and wife have a profession, there's plenty of money coming in, and they can send their kids to university, and they can give them everything they want, and it's not too much of a hassle and a struggle. I think it'd be terrible to be married and spend your whole life bringing up kids, and then have them unhappy or half-educated or something wrong like that, or can't get a job, or sort of bored out of their minds and going around vandalising telephone boxes. I think it's very, in other words, I think it's very hard to be happy living the great Australian life. I think it's sort of going to, with most people, it doesn't really make them happy. I may be wrong about that, but that's what I think. Now, after that lecture, what next? Yeah, well, now, talking about life in, sort of wonderful life in Melbourne, I know a lot of people up around the Dandenongs who went up there because they said, well, it's a sort of a picturesque area to live in, so they bought houses up there when they were cheap. But they're all bored out of their minds. They don't know what to do. They get in their little houses, separated on bush blocks, separated by trees every night, and they don't know what to do. They're all bored, and then the couples fight, husband and wife fight because there's nothing else to do, and fighting's exciting, and then they break up. Everybody I know up that way who was married, their marriages have broken up just through sheer boredom, and you get all sorts of little groups going out there like Buddhist societies and yoga clubs and things like that, which are really sort of rather transparent excuses for people to socialise. I don't condemn them for that, but people who live in those suburbs are very desperate for something to do and for contact, and it's not a very nice way to live. I don't know how I'm going to end up, but I remember seeing some people in some parts of the world. I used to go to a little banana port once in Costa Rica that was very sort of isolated, and there was an American there. He was about 50, and he had one leg. He got one leg shot off in the terrible war, but as a result of losing this leg, they gave him a pension, and with this pension, he was able to go and live in this little town, and he had a hippie colony there, and it was very famous, and you could go and visit him, and he had a whole lot of young American hippies there, and he was sort of king hippie of them all, and there were kids all over the place, and they had a boat, and they used to live on the other side of the bay, and you used to see them in their boat, and it was run by a sort of a contrived car engine and a sort of a Heath Robinson propeller, and they were sort of notables of this town. And I thought that was a sort of a great kind of a life, but you need the pension to do it. They won't let you go and live in these countries unless you got the pension, so I've got to hurry up and win the lottery and invest it and get a pension, and then go and live in one of those places where everything's peaceful and tranquil and nobody's trying to run you down on Saturday night in his 1968 Holden van because he's drunk or frustrated or didn't have a very good night. Anyway, I'm raving on, so I'll put it back to you to see whether I've put you all to sleep or not, and I'll be interested to hear what you've got to say. I don't know who's there. Perhaps some people couldn't stand it and walked out in the middle of this over. Yes, well now, I've got a lot of notes. On the Poland question, I'm not pushing a sort of a comparison between material life in Poland and material life in America. I couldn't agree with you more that material conditions in Poland are terrible and material conditions in America are very good. I've been in both countries, but I only named Poland as a country because it happens to be the country that's in between Germany and Russia, and it happens to be the first country that gets trampled over whenever a war breaks out. I could just as easily name France or parts of France or Belgium or whatever, but there are certain countries in Europe where the people know that there's always the possibility there's going to be a war, so they do their best to enjoy life while they can, and they have a deeper sense of enjoying what they've got while they've got it, because they know from recent experience that it may soon all be destroyed and taken away from them. They may have their
farmhouse, or they may be in their cafe, or they may be dancing or listening to music or drinking some wine. Now, they know that next year or the year after, they may be pushing a barrow along a road as refugees, and this gives them a greater appreciation of the things they've got while they've got them. And I'm putting this up as a phenomenon or a thing that happens in countries where there are frequent wars, which applies to a lot of the countries of Europe. It's got nothing to do with East and West or Poland, the way of life in Poland being better than the way of life in some other country. I'm just thinking of Poland as being the prime example of a country that's been devastated by war pretty frequently. You've got, I went once to a Polish port on a Greek ship to load sugar, and it was the port of Danzig, and everything had been flattened in the war, and they had pictures of what the city looked like after the war. There was hardly a brick standing, and they carefully tried to reconstruct what they could reconstruct in the old style and so on. But they had things all around them to remind them that they'd been destroyed recently. They could be destroyed again. The same applies to villages in France and Germany and a lot of European countries. It just gives the people a greater sense of what's important in life and what's not important, or in my opinion. Whereas we in Australia have always seen, we haven't been actually in the armed forces. We've seen the war on newsreels. We haven't had the invading enemy living in our houses or walking in our streets. It's not our fault that we didn't, but we lack this experience that people in some European countries have had, and this makes a difference in our thinking. That's what I'm trying to say, but I'm not trying to say that life in Poland is better than life in some other place somewhere else. But what I'm saying is that historical experience in Poland and whatever other European country that has experienced an invader and has experienced war has changed the thinking of the people. And we, being a European community a long way from Europe, have not yet had that experience. And a good thing that we haven't. But I'm just trying to explain a difference in attitudes between people in Australia and people who live in European countries where there have been wars. Now, we live a life in Australia where, as Tony, I think it was, says, everyone lives in their little brick house as a unit, and they don't very often talk to each other. They sit and watch TV. There's a central office which is communicating sort of radially with everybody in their little houses, but there's no not very much communication from house to house. But in some other countries where the standard of living is not so good, and where people may live in a small apartment, they go out into a sort of a public parlour. They can't, because of their material conditions at worst, they have to seek their entertainment elsewhere. And as a result, you find all sorts of cafes and coffee houses and things like that that are going all night till 4 o'clock in the morning. And the people come out and they meet each other in these places. They don't have to, but they do. And there's always a hustle and a bustle going on. You can be walking around at 3 o'clock in the morning and the streets are crowded with people. I think Barcelona's a place like that I can remember. But anyway, I just personally prefer that kind of life. Some people mightn't. I'm not saying that other people don't get happiness out of a different style of life. I'm putting forward a personal point of view, and it's a style of life that I prefer, which I wish to go back to. I find life, sort of home life in Melbourne to be pretty boring, but I'm not saying that because I find it to be boring, then the other 2.5 million people in Melbourne are also obliged to find it. So that's just how I find it, and I did find life more fulfilling on the other side of the world, and I think I will go back. There's certainly life here is much better materially. I couldn't knock that at all. Life is better materially, and you do get people coming from the poorer European countries to seek material, sort of increase in material standard of living here, but they also lose something for it. They lose when you travel out of your own country where you speak the language and you know the ropes and you know the way around, you know how people think, and you go to another country where you don't speak the language, well then you're at a big disadvantage. It takes you a long, long time to get fluent at it and to get to know the way that people think and to get accepted. So while they do come here to increase their material standard of living, they're also giving up something, they're losing something at the same time. People say to me, all these people who come here should learn English and they shouldn't stick in their little groups and they shouldn't speak their own language. But you can't do that. I found when I was travelling in foreign countries that it sort of drives you mad if you spend 3 months in a place and you can't speak the language and you have a lot of little difficulties and hassles every day. It really, you'll find yourself going quite cuckoo and doing things that you wouldn't dream to. It makes you very irritable and very sort of uncomfortable, and I know very much how people who come here feel, and I like the idea that when foreign people come here to increase their material standard of living, that they bring some of their background with them. I like the idea that there are people speaking foreign languages and people living in foreign communities. I used to like to go, when it existed, to the block in Melbourne where the Greek cafes are and eat Greek food and drink Greek coffee, and I'm very glad that those people have come here and brought those things with them, and may there be more of them, and I'm not sort of in favour of forcing them to become instant football fans or anything like that. I prefer to leave them to be themselves and to enjoy the difference that they bring. Now, your other question on the TV programs, yes, I was saying that TV programs are designed, slanted at certain groups of people in the community. No, I don't think it's a diabolical plot. I think it's just a clever marketing on the part of people who make TV programs. People make TV programs in order to sell them, and they've discovered that people like seeing themselves reflected and their way of life reflected, and they find that that's what people want and that's what people like, so they produce it. But what was odd about it was seeing such a program that's produced for a certain group in England show it in Australia, because that particular group may be absent from the Australian scene. So we're getting a TV series aimed for a group in England, brought out here, and there's nobody really to aim it at. It's a sort of a curiosity. Okay, well, I won't spout on too long and so on, whether it's a perfect world or whether it isn't. If you like it, you like it. I suppose that's okay. If you're looking for something more, well, it's there to be found. I don't think I ever said the English comedy had no right to be here. I'm interested to see any comedy from anywhere, and I'll try to laugh at it. All I said was that, for example, in Man About the House, that is aimed at the English people who live six to a flat, which they do, young office workers and people like that, on low wages who can't afford to individually pay the rent for a flat, get a flat together and they live in it just like they do in Man About the House. And that's what that film was aimed at. And what I'm saying is we don't have any people in that situation here, because being more affluent, people are able to individually rent flats, and we don't find too many people living 6 or 8 to a flat like you do in London. But Dev said the comedy had no right to be here. It's got every right to be here, but it reflects an aspect of life that we don't have here, but we still understand it. Well, other ways of life. The only one other one I can think of is the way of life in places like Samoa, where the young people enjoy themselves. They have children, and the old women look after the children. And when the young women get to be old women, well, they look after the children, and their children go around enjoying themselves. Now, that's really not a bad system. It's a community system, and it frees the young people to both to bear children and not be tied down, to enjoy themselves while they can. And it also gives the grandmothers something to do, and it gives the child a wider experience, because he's either in the hands of grandmother or his natural parents or somebody else. They have an alternative to the nuclear family in places like Samoa. That's one place that I can think of where they did have a different system that seemed in some ways to have some advantages on ours. What else have I got here? I think also the nuclear family, if we're going to keep on talking about nuclear families, is in some way a product of private property. You get hold of something and you say this belongs to us, and the us becomes fewer and fewer and fewer. Well, I suppose we've got to accept that in a sort of a rich society where there is the possibility for the facilities to be duplicated for small groups, where in other societies they have to be shared by a larger group. So you get a way of life that's adapted to the conditions anyway. What else have I got down here? Anyway, all I was saying was that experience has taught me that there are some different ways of life to the materialistic way, which also seem to work in their way, although the materialistic way of life is being exported to all countries. It's hard to find a place where there isn't a Coca-Cola on sale and things like that, but there are still some little corners in the world where people live a different way of life and seem to do it happily. Oh, yes, about cars now. You were saying, Kevin, that a man can be happy with his car and his ham radio. Well, that's where I happen to disagree with you, because I hate cars. I wish I could get away from them. I don't like, for example, the aggressive attitude that people have in their cars. People take out their frustrations in cars. When you're driving your car along, somebody cuts you off or does something which you think they shouldn't have done. Well, the person in the car seems to be 10 times more aggressive than the same person outside the car, and they shout insults at each other and make threatening gestures, and you're walking along the street and you get a carload of gilded youths come along and they stick their heads out the window and they yell something at you, or they throw a beer can at you or something, and then go speeding on, and people sort of drive very quickly. People take out their frustrations and their aggressions in cars, and that's an aspect of cars that I've come to dislike. I was down the street to get a hamburger a couple of hours ago, and it was there were people, young people, screaming up and down, screeching their tyres, mainly because they have nothing to do. It's a way of taking out your frustrations on other people to have a car. But I find them a menace. I'm not going to say you've got to get rid of your car or anything like that, but I just don't like them. I would like to get away from heavy traffic if I could. I know that's the impossible dream. I'm not likely to get away from them, but I would like to see the day when cars are railway engineered so they last for 20 years, and they cost $15,000 each. I think we could do with fewer of them. They're really a sort of a toy in a lot of cases. They're not just used entirely for transport, for getting you from A to B. They're a sort of a fun thing, but they're a dangerous kind of a fun thing. Another thing that scares me about cars is that I don't want to end up a paraplegic out of some stupid incident. I hate driving in other people's cars. I prefer it, as bad as all of the public transport is, I use it. I consciously avoid having a car because it scares me that I'm going to be in one of those horrible accidents at a crossing at 3 o'clock in the morning, which happen because somebody's drunk or something like that, and I'm going to end up in the wheelchair Olympics, sitting in a wheelchair firing rubber darts at a target with a bow and arrow. I don't fancy doing that for the rest of my life. I'm very careful about cars for that reason. I don't like the traffic accidents and the things that they bring. Cars I've got grave reservations about. Yeah, well, I'm sorry if I sounded to be making judgments a couple of overs ago. We've all got our ideas on various things. Yours appear to be fairly strong on what you find to suit you in living, and what's good in life and what's not. And I have strong ones too. They may not coincide, but I do have them. Yeah, that's another thing about Australian way of life that turns me off a little bit. I'm sorry to be knocking Australian way of life again, Kevin, but there are some aspects of it which require criticising. One is the idea that unorthodox people must be jumped on. There's a sort of an authoritarian mood in the air that unorthodox people must be severely dealt with. I'll give you the example of the Cedar Bay hippie commune. up there north of Cairns, if there's a lot of hippies in the bush minding their own business and doing whatever they're doing and doing nobody any harm, and then the wallopers come along with helicopters and navy and everything, although it's a sort of second D-Day invasion, and jump on these people and hammer them severely and treat them as sort of criminals, I think that's very bad. There's not much toleration of different and unorthodox people here. There are other places where we haven't got much toleration either. There are some parts of America, I think, where there's not much toleration, and some parts where there's a lot. I think when the Salt Lake City area, people are fairly rigid in their views. They are in a lot of countries, but anyway, wherever it happens, it's not. I don't think it's so good. I prefer to have different kinds of people around, to be a little bit more tolerant, at least to harmless people. I don't think the people that I gave in that example at Cedar Bay were doing anybody any harm. Whatever it was they were doing, they made sure that they got well away from civilization so they'd give offence to nobody else. And it really upsets me that they are treated like that just because they're different. I don't think they were doing anything that was terribly harmful. They were just being different, and so they got hammered. Anyway, I've probably thrown enough fuel on the fire to cause a blaze. And Mark and Tony, and they can pacify and cure the situation, throw a bit of oil on the waters, and then we'll see what happens. I'm going to agree with you on something. I couldn't agree more with what you say about that applied cunning winning more reward than applied effort. I'm afraid that's true. Cunning takes the reward from the maker of the effort in many, many cases. We see that around us all the time, so I'd have to agree with you on that point. Now, let's have a look at these notes. Yes, now, somebody was saying right back early over that psychology is misused and misapplied, but that applies to practically anything at all. So is technology. Whatever technology you happen to be involved in, it's probably electronics or something like that. The fact that you can control electronic machines doesn't give you power. All that happens is that somebody will buy your skill to control the machine the way they want it controlled. So if you have gone to the university for 4 years and become an electronic engineer or something like that, well, one of the things we can expect to happen is that you'll bring us bigger and better commercials. We used to have to watch crunchy munchies being crunched and munched in black and white, and now, thanks to all you university-trained technologists, we can see it in colour. So no matter what skill you've got, you have to market it, and it's the guy with the money who buys it and directs what will be done with it. So you really haven't got much control over whether your technology or your psychology is used for good or evil. People may buy your time to invent machines to zap millions of people with, or they may buy it to make heart paces or whatever you like, but you haven't really got a lot of control over it. You can stop working one and work for the other, but as a pool of technologists, you're just being bought and sold like any other horse on the market. Now I didn't see that film about goofy drivers, but I would have liked to have seen it, but I see them on the road every day. They still scare me. Hate being a pedestrian. I always thinking tonight's the night I'm going to get run over, but it hasn't happened yet. Thank God. Now, you were saying, Mark, that you have this sort of bad feeling. I don't know whether it's the one that I was talking about earlier, but you do get that kind of you can get that kind of a feeling, I think. Well, here I go again as I'm playing knock-knock again. But you can get, if you find a sort of dissatisfaction in the society that you're living in at present, then make about 2 searches around, and if it doesn't work, well then go to some other place. Anyway, I broke a sort of a situation like that by leaving the country and doing a bit of travelling. When it gets like that, there's often no solution. You're often on a circular path which you can't get out of, and the only way to break it is to break completely for a while with the environment that you're in and go to a new one, because when you get into a new environment, it's very absorbing in the beginning because you're spending about 3 months finding things out, finding out how it works and how the
how the society works and what people believe in and what goes on, and it can take you out of stuff and make life very interesting. So I recommend, if it's possible, commencement of travel if you don't get rid of that persistent feeling. But anyway, other people wouldn't, but I do. Well, now, it's a peculiar thing in the world that no matter where you go, no matter where it is, the people always say this is the best place on earth. No matter whether it's the most miserable or the most palatial place, if the people were born there, then it's always the best place on earth. As a matter of fact, that's what seems to sell a lot of magazines. If you look at, for example, at the Australasian Post, well, the Australasian Post has nothing in it except about isn't it great to live in Australia? It's that reinforcement thing again. In every country you go to, it's the same. If you buy the Sunday Times in England and you read the Sunday Times magazine, well, it'll have some story about how wonderful the British Empire was or how wonderful life was in England. That's really what sells newspapers. It's the reassurance that whatever you're doing is indeed the right thing to be doing. And I don't want to sort of drift into knocking, but you know, people really do defend their little piece of territory. It's very difficult to talk to people quite frequently about their own little local environment. Every man is sort of standing up for his own thing. That's one of the things I think that needs breaking down. I think people need to look at the other bloke's situation, even if he's a foreign bloke, and try to understand that it's got some virtues in it too. Now, about indoctrination and stuff like that, sometimes I listen to this station of the University of New South Wales, VL2UV, where I hear university lectures, and some of them quite frequently seem to me to be a sort of a formalisation of the obvious. There was a guy on the other night talking about the way people say things, the inflection in people's voices, and what the various inflections with illustrations indicate. It's a sort of an overtone in language. The word as it's said, the meaning of the word as it's said can be changed by the way that it's pronounced or the way that it's said. Now, I knew all about this from experience of talking to people. I was well aware of all the things he was saying. And so he collected a lot of sort of what to me were obvious facts of life together and turned them into a lecture. It made me think that at least some university courses must be pretty dull and also have a sort of a moulding effect on the mind. I think there are some university courses, particularly in arts, which are purported to broaden the mind, but actually they shape it and make it the right shape to fit in a certain sized pre-prepared box. I think there's a bit of that goes on. It's getting pretty late. It's 20 to 25 to 4 or something like that. I'm prepared to go on talking for a while longer, but sooner or later I'll have to go to bed. But anyway, somebody's been reading a Maxim Gorky novel. I take it that childhood experience you were talking about where everybody lived in the one house and the people kept on coming and going. You're referring to Maxim Gorky. I seem to remember I read that book. It's Childhood, I think it was called. Well, I'm acutely aware that the quality of what I'm saying is sort of rapidly deteriorating. I'm getting tired and I'm sort of running out of steam, and I know that I'm rambling, so I'll let you have a go at rambling. Okay, well now, just one little thing about this patriotism the same as nationalism. I think it is because the patria bit comes from Greek and the national bit comes from Latin, but they both mean the same thing. It's just two English words that have come from Greek and Latin, and they're parallel or equal, I think. So I think it does mean the same thing. And yes, it has been quite an interesting comment. But one does sort of talk ad lib and ramble a bit, and perhaps not get all the ideas into the lucid and concise form one would like to express them in. I think you're pretty good at assembling your thoughts like that, Tony. You seem to say what you have to say fairly clear. I don't think I always do. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But I'll lie in bed and I'll think about it, and I'll probably come up with some fresh slants on things by about this time tomorrow night if anyone's on.
And I'm sorry I was giving anyone the impression that I'm knocking. I like to tell a bit of an iconic...
Unfortunately, at this point, both stations were doubling.
...take the cows and turn them upside down and round and examine them, and I like to throw a few ideas around, and I'm sort of made like that. I like to analyse things and take things apart, and I hope I haven't offended anyone by knocking. Anyway, I'll become known as knock on this band. I'll have to say, you have to say knock knock, who's there? VK3 who? And so anyway, I'm all for a sort of open discussion. I like nothing to be sacred. I like to discuss everything and anything within reason. I'm not going to maybe make it too hot, but I do like to discuss it. I do like to put ideas forward and get other people's reactions, even if they don't agree. But I don't sort of believe that anything is so holy that it's sort of above discussion. So anyway, I hope that you're on tomorrow night. I'd like to have another discussion tomorrow night if anyone's in the mood. So I'll say good night to everybody. Good night, people. Where I'm at now. But what I was saying is that I like to discuss everything. I don't think that there's anything that's beyond discussion or beyond criticism. Not even our national pride or our way of life. I think that discussion can only improve it. And I really don't think it's perfect. It's all right, but it's not perfect. And that's an opinion I'm going to stick to. And so I'll probably be on again tomorrow night saying similar things. So you better come back again tomorrow night, Alan, and defend Australia's honour. And I'll take the devil's role, and I'll knock it a bit more. Anyway, it's been most interesting talking to everybody. And I hope we're all on again tomorrow night and we can continue with another discussion, but I know that I'm going to feel terrible by about 11 o'clock tomorrow morning, and but I'll still come at it again tomorrow night, even if I do. So thank you for the conversation, everybody.
Interesting subject, but if you get sort of highly technically qualified, well, it ties you to places where there's that kind of industry. It means you've got to stay in places where there's an electronic industry or a large population and broadcasting stations and things like that, so that you can get a job. But I've now discovered that if I was starting it all over again, the thing that I would take up would be installer of crossbar telephone exchanges, because I've discovered that persons who can install telephone exchanges are in great demand in sort of exotic places in the world. I've met people in Brazil and Costa Rica and places like that, foreign people, Frenchmen and Australians and Germans and people like that, who were wandering around those places and getting plenty of work because they just happen to be installing a lot of telephone exchanges in those places, and technicians who can do the job are in great demand. So I always kick myself that I didn't know that and I didn't learn to install telephone exchanges, because I don't think it's very much more difficult than being a ship's operator or anything like that. It's a fairly low-level technical job. I just wish I had experience in it now. Yes, well, now this redundancy business you were talking about, it's worrying us all. We're all getting put out of work by it. Machines are taking over, and I don't think it's going to be like they used to predict in the magazines, that the result of all these machines doing work formerly done by human beings is going to be that you're all going to work a 20-hour week and have lots of time for leisure. I don't think it's going to happen like that. What is going to happen is that some people are going to get richer and more important, and other people are just going to get damn poor in 5 years' time if I'm earning it at all. And anyway, I think if the worst comes to the worst, I'm going to start another Kelly gang. So if you're around in 5 years' time and you want a job, you can join my new Kelly gang, because that's the only way it's going to be possible to live, I think, in the very near future. If I knew that name, that name rang a bell. I was thinking Neil Diamond when I said it was a pop thing, but Drew Diamond does ring a very strong bell. I don't actually remember what year it was I taught you, but certainly I taught at Sandringham Tech. I think I started there late 1962, and I was there
63, 64 and 65, and certainly I did teach at Drew Diamond. I'm just trying to think what I taught you. It was one of my Form 1 science classes around about 1963. That was probably okay. We used to have a bit of fun in them, I seem to remember. And I will be very glad to see you if you want to come around. By all means, come around and see me. And I'll give you my address, and that's just near the corner of the Glenferrie Road and Barker's Road, far from ML.
AC's away. Okay. And Dave's got a 101 if he needs it for receiving. Right, the earlier bit, here we go.
Randall McDonald. I met Randall McDonald in 1970, I think it was. He was working for Miller. He was an apprentice technician there, but I haven't seen any of the others for years. And I did go away from Australia in '66.
No, he has to tune himself in.
Country Gully Tech in 1970. And then I went overseas again, and I've only been back recently. So I'm very glad to catch up with you again, Drew Diamond. You can remind me of some of the things that happened at Sandringham Tech if you like. I thank you for the flattering opinion too of my teaching ability. I don't know whether it's all true. Maybe sort of a few years ago and past, your memory might have dimmed or something like that. But anyway, I'm glad I left that impression with you. And thank you very much.
Tony's cross-modding you with his sound effects.
Yes, well, that's very interesting, Drew. Actually, you've given one of the credits to the wrong man. The guy who had the spin dryer was John Watson, I think. I remember John Watson had a spin dryer. I probably borrowed it from him, but I must give him the credit for being the instigator of the spin dryer. I remember that rocket and rabbit thing. I think one thing I used to do quite often was I had a machine there for generating hydrogen, which I generated from caustic soda and aluminium, and it was a bit of a Heath Robinson thing. All that was done in a big flask that used to sit in a bucket, and when it got boiling hot and threatened to crack the flask, there was another bucket full of cold water standing by, which you used to have to tip in to cool it down again. Anyway, with this contraption, I used to inflate the rubber balloons, and then the kids would hang a postcard with a stamp underneath it, and we used to let it fly off. And once we got the car back from the Brunswick tip or something, this airmail fell down on the Brunswick tip, and they posted it back. That was a great event. I remember that. I was there in 1964, and I was there till the end of 1965. I left at the end of 1965. Anyway, come around and see me by all means. I'll be most interested. You can phone me on 81 and check up first. I'm sure to be home. I'm home most of the time. Actually, I'm only... I've been out of Australia for a long time. I'm just here in Australia again because my mother's got pretty old and needs somebody around. And I'll probably leave again after a while. I don't know. But anyway, I'll be here for the next few months, so do please come and see me. I'll be very glad to see you. I used to work at that PMG Research Laboratories years and years ago in Exhibition Street. I used to work once as a draftsman in the PMG department, in the central office drafting office in Spring Street. I used to draft radio chassis and things like that. That was a long time ago. That was in the 1950s. And then I worked also at the research labs in Exhibition Street. And there was that was also in the 50s, and they had some German scientists there they'd brought out from Germany after the war or something. I don't know how they got hold of them. One was Dr. Rumpelt, and Dr. Rumpelt used to look like something out of a movie, and it used to be very cold, and they'd be huddled up in a great big overcoat, and he was quite an amiable old guy. Anyway, he used to have these pages and pages of calculations, and I used to have to feed these calculations into a big calculating machine. It was like a huge typewriter with hundreds of little windows in it where numbers popped up, and you punched into all this information, and then
So you go in on lower.
And this carriage would slowly move across, and the figures would come up for the result of the calculation. I was there for about a year, I think. I can hardly remember that it was so long ago. Anyway, I'm glad to...
He's a beauty, this bloke.
Despite the education we gave you at Sandringham Tech, you managed...
Say that again.
And passed some examinations. That's very reassuring to us, because while it wasn't a bad tech, it certainly, in those days, the education system had some defects. I think things have probably improved a bit now, but it used to worry me at times then. So I'm glad that some students did survive it and managed to succeed in spite of it. I used to teach maths, so I like teaching science best. I used to have a lot of fun teaching science. There were a lot of things that you could do. But I think I was a terrible maths teacher, actually, so I hope you passed your maths exam all right. If you did, well, I probably didn't teach you. Yeah, well, now, what else has been happening? Yeah, well, I think I'll put it over to you, Dave. I'm sort of run out of things to say for the moment. Just one thing, Dave. So, yes, about the broadcast op certificate. Well, yes, I think I have got it. I got the